I'm going to be making a modified version of the Juliette hooded pocket shawl from a video which I will be linking below and referencing throughout so I can show you what I'm doing differently from the original. And I'm doing it for a few reasons. One, I wanted to save yarn. Two, I wanted to save time. And three, it's just what worked better for me. And I'll tell you a couple of different options on some things. So I wanted to apologize for my voice. I've been kind of sick lately. And I also want to apologize for if my children interfere during some of these clips, because that's the life of a mother. So we're going to start off with a slip knot. Now, I start by making the pockets and the hood, because those two items take most of a skein of yarn for me. I should probably start by showing you the yarn that I use, actually. I've been using this Big Twist brand from Joann's because I got it at a serious discount. I got it on sale, and it was one of the cheapest anyway, and the colors, I just really liked them for the people I'm making them for. My skeins are 380 yards, and the original, she had 200 some yards in each, and she used 7 skeins. I was able to make all of mine out of just 4 skeins each, so I did cut down on the yarn use some. This one is medium rose color, which I think is perfect for my one sister. I'm making 8 of these for Christmas presents, and so I've gotten quite a bit of experience, and I'm kind of sharing some of my experiences with it. I'm going to start with a pocket so that you can have a refresher on how to make those, the concepts that go into this project, and because it's one of the first things that I do. So just like in the video, you start by chaining 22. Now, you can make it different widths, whatever you want, but you'll want to make sure that you end with an odd number of stitches. So we did an extra one so that we can skip the first one to start. Here's the thing. You have a couple of options here. You can start the row the way she suggested in the original video, which is also my preferred method for this, by going into this stitch and doing a single crochet, then going back into your same single crochet that you just did, and then doing another single crochet, your stacked single crochets to make a double crochet. That's how she has you start every row, and that's how I like to start every row too, which I never discovered until this project. Here's why. Because the other option I tried is by chaining 2 to start a row. So I'm just doing one extra one and then doing a double crochet in there. For the start of this, it kind of looks the same when you just start it, but it also has this extra little chain 2 here. And for me, as you go along, chaining 2 to start a row, it makes it much harder coming back the other way to put your last stitch into that chain 2. Whereas when you have your stacked single crochets, it's so much easier to get the stitch into it with the next row. It really is so much easier. But there's a give and a take, because as you'll see at the end, when you do the stacked single crochet, I felt like it had a little bit more jagged edge than the other option. Here I have another shawl that I made where this is where I tested doing it a different way. And the edge is still like not perfectly smooth, but it's smoother, I think, than the other ones by doing it chaining 2 at the end. But you also have these little gaps in here that you don't get the other way, these little gaps, and it just takes more time to try and work into that stitch again. So you can pick which method works best for your purposes. Either way, you're going to end up doing 1 double crochet into each of these chains and make it 21 stitches total. You need it to be an odd number because of the fillet puff fillet sequence, which I will be showing you on this pocket soon. But if you want to make it a different size, you're more than welcome to do that. I did do the pocket mostly the way she said in the original video, but I only decided to do 1 row less. She said you do 22 stitches across, and then you do 9 rows up. And I experimented with 10 rows, 9 rows, and 8 rows, and I found that 8 rows is basically just as good. There's not really a noticeable difference, but it saves a little bit of yarn and still gives you a decent sized pocket. So that's what I'm going to do with this. As for attaching the pocket, you have some options there as well. In the original video, she crocheted the pockets on, which the more I've practiced, the easier I've found it, but starting off, crocheting the pockets on did not seem appealing to me, and I didn't think the look was worth it, but you may feel differently, especially if you have a solid color yarn and want to have more of a differentiation there. That's perfectly all right. And at the end, I'm going to show you, I'm going to sew these pockets on, and so you can see what that looks like, but on this other shawl that I did crochet them on so you could see what that looks like. So I've done 1 row, and you're going to do 7 more, well, I'm going to do 7 more after this to make 8 total, and then I'm going to come back and show you the next step. Alright, I've done 8 rows, and here I am again. I forgot to mention before that I'm using a 6.5mm hook, which is a little bit bigger, and I'm kind of pulling the yarn a little bit tighter so that it comes out about the same size stitches. I feel like it's using a little bit less yarn because it's being stretched a little bit, because when I tried doing it with a smaller hook, it used more yarn in the end. I'm not really sure why, but so we've got our 8 rows. Then we're going to start the fillet puff fillet sequence by starting as every row with our stacked single crochet, which of course I'm much worse at when the camera is rolling. And then instead of going into the next with a double, I like to do a nice big chain one. I use my thumb rest and kind of stretch this out a little bit because I find it much harder on the next row to go into that chain one space with the hook unless I make sure it's bigger. I'll show you next row what I'm talking about. And then you're going to skip one and go into the next with a double crochet. And you're going to keep alternating chain one, skip one, double crochet, chain one, skip one, double crochet, all the way to the end of the row. So we're done with the first fillet row. I'm going to flip it, and I'm just kind of reminding you how this sequence goes, because I don't know about you, but when I watched the original video, it was super informative and really good, but I had to watch it like 17 times so that I would remember how things go. So I thought, even if you watch the original, it couldn't hurt to have a refresher. Then you're gonna, once you start that row the normal way, you're gonna go into this chain space, which is why I made it nice and loose, because I always find it hard to do this part if it's too tight, which of course I'm struggling with now because I said something about it, with a double crochet. Then we're gonna start a puff. Loop it, go in, 1, 2, 3, and 4 times. This right here is why I prefer a plastic hook for this project. It slides nicely. I mean, the metal ones slide once they warm up, but this one just feels like it slides so much smoother to me. And more importantly, the shape of this hook is really conducive to holding onto that yarn, but it doesn't stick up too far here. It's like even with this part down here, so that it can go through the tube easier, I think. But you want to make sure that you hold onto this part so that it does stay in there, and you want to keep these a little bit loose so that it can go through without catching too much. One thing I have found with the big twist yarn is that it's very easy for these fibers to come apart and your hook to end up in the middle of them, so that's something you want to watch out for when you're doing any of this stuff. And it's very easy to catch just a few threads as you go through, and it's not like a whole strand, it's just the little bits. Definitely not something you want to be pulling on. So then we're going to put a double crochet into the next chain space and do another puff on that same one. 1, 2, 3, 4, and pull through. Sometimes pulling up on it too tightly can make them draw together too much, so if this is too wide, it's going to be catching on them more, so you've got to watch for your specific hook what works best for going through there. One thing that I had to do some of the time to loosen it up after I would get all my strands on the hook, I would, sometimes if I pulled it up too tight and it was too narrow, I would just push this down and like give it a little wiggle, spread them out again, and then just pull up a little bit so that it would go through smoothly. So you're going to do those puffs in each chain space all the way across, and I'll meet you right back when I do that. I lied. I'm actually back after just finishing one more puff because I just remembered a tip I was going to give you was to pull out extra string before doing the puffs to help keep them from getting too tight. Alright, we've got a puff in each of the chain spaces. You definitely don't want to put a stitch into the post spaces. And we've gotten to the end, so we want to make it uniform with the other side. That's kind of the mantra of this project. Make each side equal. And we're going to put one double crochet into this last spot here. And after we turn, we're going to do another filet row on top. And we're going to try to make it, well, we're just going to follow the original video on this, and you'll see that it actually makes it line up really nicely with this lower row. So we've got our first stitch, we're doing our chain, and then just go into the space between the puffs the easiest possible way we could have done this, and it lines up super nicely. So we're going to do our chain one and go into the space for the rest of the row. Now you have a couple of options. The way you attach your pocket determines what you do to end the pocket. Now, in the original, she ended by finishing this row that we're on right now. And then when she attached the pocket, she crocheted around the edge, and once she did all three sides, she just crocheted a row of single crochet across the top of this. But my preferred method was to sew the pockets on, which is what I did with probably half of the ones I did so far. But because of that, I didn't have the crochet across the top row unless I did it now. So that's what I'm going to do. For this last stitch, I wasn't sure if I should go into the space just after this puff or the last stitch. So in order to make it a little bit smoother on the end, I went into the last stitch. So I kind of skipped these two. I don't know if that's how it's supposed to be because I don't remember her saying it in the video, but that's what I did anyway, and I think it turned out okay. Anyway, gonna do a row of single crochet across the top, and then we're gonna end the pocket. I don't chain one or anything, I just go straight into it, just like she does to start each row by doing stacked singles. No chaining, just going for it. And that's my baby awake now. I finished that row of single crochet across the top, and this is what the pocket looks like. I like doing 8 rows also because it ends by having a strand at each opposing corner when you end with a row of single crochet like that. And I kind of use these strings to hold my pockets in place when I go to attach them to the body. Because I don't have stitch markers, I just use little pieces of string anyway to mark stitches. Of course, I'm sure it would be much handier if you used stitch markers or pins or bobby pins even or something, but I'm a cheapskate and I don't. Next, we make the hood, and I am sorry for my son helping out with this part and being in the frame. I'm also sorry for awkward camera angles. I wasn't really thinking about it when I set it up. I just wanted a place where I could sit comfortably for a long period of time and be seen on camera. So you're going to start by chaining 45, just like she said in the video, and then you're going to go back down that chain with a row of double crochet up until you get to the last stitch.
As you'll see coming up here soon, once you get to the last stitch, you're going to do 5 double crochet in that same stitch, and that's going to kind of circle you around the end of the chain, and then you're going to go back down the other side with a single double crochet, not a single double crochet, with 1 double crochet in each chain spot, and then that'll be the end of the first row. To start the second row, you're going to start with 2 double crochet in the same spot, and then 1 double crochet in each spot going back around the other way, and then you're going to end the row with 2 double crochet in the same spot, and you're going to keep going row by row the same way, doing 2 double crochet in each end and then circling back around. Once you finish 17 rows like that, that's when you're going to start on your filet puff filet sequence, which I'm only going to show you how I do the ends of that sequence. But you do around the same exact way as you would do it across. It's just you have to adjust how you're holding the hood a little bit differently because it's rounded. And after you finish your filet puff filet sequence, it's going to be 2 more rows of regular double crochet, but also adding an extra double crochet at each end, just like you do with the rows coming up until that point. So here's after 2 rows, 3 rows, 4 rows, 5 rows, 6 rows, 7 rows, 8 rows, 9 rows, 10 rows, 11 rows, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and the filet row. So I just showed you how I did 2 in the end. Now this is your puff row. You start off with 2 in the end. One of the versions I did was starting the puff right into that second stitch in the very end there. I've also done it where I skip that and just sort of skip into the next space there. You can do it either way. It seemed to work just fine for me either way. But you also want to make sure you do it the same way on each end so that you're keeping it consistent, whichever way you choose. So here I've put a puff and a double crochet in the same spot at the end, and now we move on to the filet row. Once you're done with the filet row, you're going to do 2 more rows of double crochet only, and that's the finished hood. And there it is, all done. Once 2 pockets and a hood are done, it's time to move on to the body. I start by chaining 97 because our arms are shorter and we're not as tall as the original maker. Then put a stitch marker in the last chain, then chain 96 more. Next, go across with 2 rows of double crochet all the way across, and I kind of tucked the end string in there, but you don't have to do that. The third row is the filet row, which I'm here right now up to the middle. You put your double stitch in that middle spot where your stitch marker is, then chain 2 and put another double crochet in the same spot, and that's going to mark your middle for the rest of the rows you do. The next row is the puffs. Once you get to the middle, you put a puff into one side of the chain 2 that you did the last row. Then you chain 2 between puffs also to mark your middle, chain 2. Then put another puff in the other side of the chain 2 from the row before. and that's gonna be your middle spot again. I apologize for background noises. I have one kid gone, but the other one decided to wake up from her nap. The next row is fillet again. You're going to put a double crochet into the spot right next to that puff, then chain one like you do between the fillet stitches, and to put a double crochet inside, like looping it around your chain two. Then you're going to chain two again, put another double stitch looping it under there again, then chain one and put it right next to that puff. For the next one, it's a double crochet in each spot row, and once you get to the middle, you're going to put 1, 2 double crochets into that chain 2 spot, then chain 2, then put 2 more double crochets in that chain 2 spot. And I like to count 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2 every time I do that. And that's how you're going to do the rest of the body up until you get to the edge again. 5 rows from the edge is when you're going to start on your fillet puff fillet sequence again. Here I'm showing every 5 rows just to demonstrate some progress. I managed to get up to 35 rows total, so once I got to row 30, I started the fillet puff fillet sequence again.
Here we have the finished shawl body, and I've folded it in half. It's time to attach the hood, and I always like to line up the middle and then start crocheting from the middle just to keep it lined up, and then go back and go the other way after. So I'm just gonna show you how I do that. Here's that first chain we started with when we made the hood, and I'm gonna go to that center stitch where we originally put the stitch marker and put those two together. Put my hook through both of those, and then bring up my working yarn, and then I like to hold on to this tail and put a stitch in there and sort of tighten it in. And then as I stitch, I like to go around that tail so that it gets crocheted right in and you don't have to worry about tucking it later. I'll try to make sure that I go into each one of these stitches on the shawl body, but the hood is, the stitches are sideways, so it's kind of flexible on that side, I think. I just try to make sure I'm not stretching it. If you have stitch markers you want to use, that's probably a good idea. But I just kind of wing it. So here's the side that's done. I've flipped it over and I'm back in the middle. But this time I'm going to be going in through the sides and out through the individual stitches. So I'm just going to try to make sure I line them up well and get into each one of these stitches. And I'm going to start here just to get my thread going. So that's the hood fully attached. And I like to attach the hood first so that it gives me a reference point for where to put the pockets. You can do the pockets first if you want, you just have to make sure that you put the hood on the right way from there. So because the hood lays back this way, this is the outside, and the pockets will then go on that same side of the shawl. And I started out with the hood on my right because I'm right-handed, and I will go down and around, so I'll turn it as I go. I like to use the needle to sew it on with a blanket stitch, which I can show you soon, but the other option is to crochet it on. And I did do that with a few of them, and I found that it goes on straighter if you have it lined up first, and then you fold the shawl body underneath and go through so that it keeps you going through exactly the same part of the shawl body. And I kept counting stitches. Every stitch I did along the bottom, I made sure it was the same number up from the bottom of the shawl body, just to keep it as straight as possible. It still came out kind of crooked no matter what I did. That was the method I used for these pockets. So you can kind of see that it's kind of straight, but not perfectly. So here I've got my pocket laid out. I counted in rows from the sides to make sure it was the same number of rows sticking out on each side, and then I counted stitches up. I sort of tried on the first one to figure out how many rows up the pocket needed to be for us short-armed people, and I figured 9 stitches beneath the pocket, and the 10th stitch gets attached to the pocket. And I've done, since it's a 35 row shawl, it works out to be about 5 rows in from each side. And like I was telling you earlier when we made the pockets, I like to have a thread sticking out on each side so that I can line it up like this, and then I can use this thread to loop in here where the spot is right, and it just helps keep it anchored a little bit. If you have stitch markers or want to use extra thread to tie it in place, that works too. But I also like having them this way so that as I'm stitching, I can hold the little tail in. I can stitch it down so I don't have to tuck it later. Just my way of doing things, I guess. And it never hurts to count lots and lots of times to make sure you're keeping it consistent. So then I've got both these tails that are going to get stitched in there as I go. And I try to keep my stitch widths a little bit consistent, but it can be a challenge for sure. So you're going to go in and then wrap this around and pull it through. I like to hold it up this way so I can keep my tension kind of consistent on that. Go in, making sure you're getting both the pocket and the body of the shawl. Wrap that around and pull it through. So you can kind of see how that stitch is going to look. And if you forget to go through to wrap it around like I just did, you can always put your needle back in this way and pull it up, and it'll have the exact same effect. You definitely want to make sure you're going in between the stitches and not in the middle of the threads, if you can help it. I know these kind of split apart, so it's not always possible. So I will meet you back when I get to the corner and show you how I do that. Alright, so I've turned my work because I'm about to be working on this edge instead, but here I am at the corner, making sure I'm on the 10th stitch up from the bottom, and I like to go in and kind of catch, make sure there's a lot of threads there, because I feel like corners are typically going to be the first place to rip. And then I go through there, wrap it like usual, then I go in the same spot and then go at a slightly different angle to get out. And I've been making sure I do at least 3 stitches in each corner, just like I did at the end of the hood, just to give it that extra strength. So then for the bottom, I just make sure I go through both loops of each of these starting stitches and then sort of wrap it around the 10th stitch and then do it the same way as before. And that's how I go along the bottom. Through. And in these in-between spots, I sort of go around this little part here. I don't know if you can see that very well, but just kind of keep it lined up so that once you get to this other edge, it'll be in the right spot. Just try to keep from stretching any of this as you go. And that's all there is to it. Once you get to this corner, you do the same thing and stitch this extra tail down, and then once you get to the top, you can end. I also sometimes do a couple extra stitches at the top just to make sure that doesn't rip too, but you can do whatever you like. And that's the last step, is to get both those pockets on, and make very sure you're putting them on the right side of the shawl. That was always a concern of mine during each one of these.
So that's it. That's how I make the Juliette hooded pocket shawl, slightly different than the original way. If you liked the video, please leave a like, leave a comment to let me know what you thought or any questions you might have, and if you like what you see, you could subscribe to my channel. Thank you.